I'm talking on developing VR experiences. Hi, I'm Tom Forsyth. I've been a rendering programmer most of my life with a brief foray into hardware design at Intel, which was a little bizarre, but lots of fun. And now I'm here at Oculus, and I write large chunks of the rendering and the distortion stuff and the time warp, mainly for the desktop SDK. And this talk is not about any of that. This talk is about, because if you need help, if the SDK doesn't do all that stuff for you, then kind of I screwed up. You shouldn't have to worry too much about that stuff. So this is a talk more about the things that, okay, I've got the basics, I've got distortion working, I've got, basic movement around, a room or something working. Why does my game not work very well? And so that's what we're talking about, the higher level stuff that really you as game designers and programmers really care about. So yeah, this talk is not about the hardware specs. We discussed some of the hardware specs this morning. They're either well documented or they will be shortly. It's not about the use of the SDK and distortion. Again, if we've done our jobs right, they're well documented. And if they're not, send me email. If you have a question, then probably other people have the same question. We should document that stuff. And it's also not about user calibration. User calibration is a very important topic. It's something I spend a lot of my time working on. But you as developers should not have to worry about it. The SDK should help you out. Use the user profiles that are there. They are important. Each of us has a different shaped face, has a different shaped eyeballs and stuff like that. And so use that profile data, but you shouldn't need to worry too much about where it came from. Kind of noisy. So these are the topics I am going to be talking about. So first is be kind to your players. This is not normal game programming wisdom. We like to scare our players. We like to shoot at them. We like to blow them up. As I think Mike Abrash said this morning, I do not want to be in Call of Duty. It is terrifying. The second is VOR gain, which I will explain, and I will explain why it's important. IPD in the neck, there's some simplifications that we all use around here, and it's a little more in depth, and there's just some things to be watching for. Changing world scale, how you can change the scale of the apparent world. It's a very powerful tool. It can work around a lot of limitations, but you've got to do it right. The height of the player, fascinating little discussion. We'll talk some about transition animations, by which I mean things like getting in and out of cars, picking things off the floor, things that are normally they're part of every game, every experience, but if you just do them sort of the naive way, they're terrible. Meathook avatars. It's a great name. It's the name of my death metal band. I'll tell you about it, Len. And then a little bit of tech, Framerate and time warp. So first up, be kind to your players. We, as developers, we spend hours a day with our face buried in this little box of lights, and it shows us all sorts of mad stuff, because there's bugs, and there's temporary stuff, and so on. And almost by definition, once it starts looking really good, that's when we ship it. So our brains learn to partition the world very efficiently. Says, oh, here's the real world. I'm in the real world typing at my computer. Then I pick up this crazy thing, I stick it on my face, and it's crazy in here. And the brain learns to switch off. It says, no, you're looking for bugs, you're looking for rendering artifacts, you're looking for things that are weird, it's going to be strange in there, things missing all over the place. And so the brain very quickly learns not to believe any of this is real. That's the opposite of what we want our users to do. We want them to believe it's real. problem is, because we're used to this box not being real, we're really bad judges of whether something is a nice experience, whether it's even a correct experience. And so if you do the experience that you think is really cool, they're just going to be absolutely brain blasted. It will be way too much for them. It's the same as if you've spent, ages balancing the difficulty of your game and you say, yeah, this game is just the right difficulty now. That means only one person in the world can play it, and that's you. Everyone else finds it completely impossible, right? We know this. We know we have to bring in new people who've never played the game before for difficulty balancing. It's the same with the experience. Now, difficulty you can balance at the end of the day. If your experience is too intense, oh dear, what do I do about it? So do this testing early, do it often, and do it with naive players. And when they say, after 10 minutes, hey, that was quite intense, please listen to them, dial it down. Because otherwise, they'll just stop playing and give you a 1-star review, and they won't be happy. The other thing that is sometimes thought of is people say, oh, I'm good at VR, or I'm bad at VR, I'm very sensitive to VR. And this is a huge variability. Mike Labrash has talked about how he's one of the most sensitive people. He's certainly the most sensitive person I know. He made himself ill when writing Quake on a 13-inch CRT. He is very, very sensitive. Other people, you can chuck crazy stuff on their face, spin them around, and they're like, it's all right. Massive variation. But it's not along a single axis. There's plenty of people who are very sensitive to some things and not others. The example I have is going up and down stairs. I'm one of the more sensitive people to motion sickness in VR, but I have no problem walking up and down virtual stairs, either up or down. Other people I know can walk around on the flat all day long, but you show them a set of stairs and they hate walking up them. Down is fine, up, bad. We're still getting to the bottom of why this is. Other people can go upstairs all day long, downstairs, not so much. So it's weird, these little sensitivities we have. So everything we warn you about and say, hey, what's your sensitivity to this? It's completely, orthogonal direction to all the other ones, unfortunately. And it's not a skill you can learn. There was this hope that you could start your game off nice and slow and then sort of ramp up, and by that time the player's now used to a bunch of stuff. It sort of works, but only in that you've presented a bunch of experiences, and so they're kind of used to the sort of experiences, so they can anticipate themselves, and so they can effectively brace for impact. I don't know if brace for impact is what we're really wanting to do here. And you also run across this problem that you can also get negative feedback. If you make them a little bit worried by an experience, the more they have of that, the worse it gets. You definitely don't want that. That's terrible. They'll never, get halfway through your game. So watch for that. And the best practices guide contains what we know. Read it. Even if you don't remember it all, just think like, oh, my game's got that. Oh, I must remember to check on that. Maybe it's fine, but check it. So start on the gentler side. One thing that we've had is people go into VR experiences and they go like, wow, I'm in VR, oh, this is awesome, and it's really intense and stuff. And then you go like, what color was the person's shirt? They have no idea. What was the line of dialogue they said to you? I can't remember. Okay, they're too busy like, being in VR. Hey, the two characters that were talking, you can't remember, right? So it's an experience, but if you're trying to get across a gameplay thing or plot or characters or all these nice subtle nuances that your designers have spent a long time on, that'll just blew through them, and unhappy designers. Don't do that to your designers. So make these intense experiences optional. The defaults should be low. There's plenty of us who like jumping in for the, a 10-minute blast of VR-ness. whatever that is. But make it opt-in, right? The default should be sort of gentle and nice and stuff. If your game is inherently violent and messy and stuff like that, there's tricks like reducing the world scale that can just reduce the intensity of all that, rather than having to reauthor all your content and stuff. And yeah, default low. Experienced VR people who've got their VR legs, they'll happily go into the options and crank everything to the right. Also make it easy to change at any time. I helped port Team Fortress 2 to VR, which is incredibly intense. It's not a great VR game. We did it for technical reasons rather than because we thought it was a good gameplay. And sometimes it's really fun to just jump in there for 10 minutes, kill people, and just be absolutely immersed in this insane cartoon violence world. And after that, I dial everything sort of back a bit so I can actually play the game without, my heart exploding from adrenaline rush, right? So let people, go in there and like, oh, wow, I'm in a spaceship. And then, after a while, just dial it back and go, oh, now I actually want to play the game and, have, a 3-hour game where I actually got some progress done rather than just running around blowing shit up. So this VOR reflex, Vestibulo-Optical Reflex. This is a really nice diagram I found on Wikipedia. Thank you to them. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Really, just it's kind of obvious what's going on here. It doesn't need much explanation. All right then, just for the slow people. So this is a horizontal slice through the head with the eyeballs at the top and your ears at the bottom. And I'm just showing the systems for your control. Right? Moving your head horizontally, there's matching ones for vertical movement, and there's actually also matching ones for rotation that are a little different, but I'm just showing the horizontal ones. So at the bottom, we have the ears and the semicircular canals in the ears that detect the motion of your head. And these are very, very similar to the gyroscopes we have in the head mount display, actually. It's a bunch of little particles suspended in goo that pulls hairs around. And so when you have acceleration, rotational acceleration. At the top, we have the eyeballs and the muscles that control the eyeballs. And in the middle, we have these reflex neurons. And this is an incredibly simple reflex path. It's one of the fastest reflex paths in the entire body because it has to be. And so what these do is they're used in fixation. I've got an object in front of me, I'm looking at it, and I move my head. As soon as I move my head right, this reflex neuron, it's detected by the motion in the movement in my ears. This reflex chain immediately moves my eyes left. And it's very hard to suppress this. It's nearly impossible. You do it when your eyes are shut. You do it in the dark. It just happens. There's some modification with the neck muscles and stuff, and there's some modification with how far away the object is. But on the whole, this is completely automatic. And it's very smooth. It's very low latency, less than 10 milliseconds. I don't know what the actual number is. And it's very smooth. It is not saccadic. We talk about these saccades, right, where the eye jumps around. These are absolutely smooth. You can read a book while doing this. It's really impressive how good your vision quality is. And in fact, these are what cause saccades, right? If you're looking around a room and you're trying to sweep it gently, what's actually happening is this reflex is fixing your eye on one place. And so you have, as your head moves, it's fixed, and you have to jump. So you have to override it with these little jumps. So this is actually where saccades come from, or some of them, not the microsaccades. And this is the vestibulo, I can't say it. It's on the slide. And so this is what we call VOR, right? Now, these neurons in the middle have a gain, right? As we get tired, as we get old, all these sort of things, the signal from the ear needs to be multiplied by a certain amount to produce the same rotation, right? We want 10 degrees of head rotation equals minus 10 degrees of eye rotation. So that is the gain, right? So VOR gain is this factor built into the neurons, and it adapts slowly to, our eyes get old, our ears get old. And it's fine-tuned during fixation. So when we are fixating on something, there's a feedback mechanism that says, oh, the image is still shifting slightly, so dampen it down or heighten it up. But this tuning is extremely slow. And where this is most apparent is if you have glasses and you get a new thing from your optician, a new prescription from your optician. When you change your glasses, for a while, it's wrong, right? The world's swimming. And it takes you a while to adjust to this VOR gain, to the new spectacles. So so the problem is, I want to move my head right by 10 degrees, my eyes want to move left by 10 degrees, but what if my view is compressed? And here's an example looking through some glasses that I think that's actually Seattle skyline. And you can see that these are pretty strong glasses. They're basically halved the size of the image. So now when I turn my head right by 10 degrees, because the image is smaller, my eyes only want to turn left by 5 degrees. And so the VOR gain needs to change for these new glasses. And it does this by noticing, hey, I rotated the eyes left by 10 degrees, and the image still moved across my retina, and so this does two things. It causes disorientation, because you think you're drunk or something, and it causes this VOR gain adaptation. Now, this takes 1 to 2 weeks. This is for eyeglasses, assuming continuous use, right? You use them all the time when you're awake. And opticians are pretty happy with 1 to 2 weeks. They think that's pretty good. We don't want this in VR, right? Asking the player to play your game 16 hours a day for 2 weeks is not going to go down well. And anyone who has glasses and knows this problem, right, you feel nauseous. So where am I going with this? When we have monitor games, especially first-person games, typically you'll have a field of view slider, right? This is to overcome the fact that a monitor is typically a fairly narrow field of view, and we want to express this much wider field of view. So they have an FOV slider, and you can adjust it to whatever you want. This is fine on a monitor, because a monitor occupies the central part of your vision. VOR gain seems to be, some of it is determined by the periphery vision. So the periphery is the room, right? That's not changing. You can see your keyboard, whatever, the window behind us. None of that's changing. So the fact that the thing on the monitor changes is usually fine. Again, Michael Abrash, the famous counterexample to exactly this. So some people are still sensitive here. The problem is in the Rift, of course, there's no peripheral vision. Or rather, what there is all in virtual space. So if you do a field of view scale that's not the same as the actual physical scale of the light coming into your eyes, you're going to cause this problem. And yeah, Dr. It plays with my players' brains when I do this, so please don't. Please don't. FOV is not an arbitrary choice. It matches the physical characteristics of the device, right? It changes depending on how close you can get your eyes to the lens, but that's the player's choice, not the game designer's choice. So the SDK will help you on this. There's a bunch of physics you can go on, but it's this real actual physical number, and the SDK will feed it to you, and please don't play with it. Avoid changing FOV, avoid zoom. You really, really need 10 degrees of physical head rotation to get 10 degrees of pixel flow the other way. The next topic is IPD. We all talk about IPD, interpupillary distance. And in theory, or to most people's understanding, you really only need the IPD, right? It's how far apart my eyes are. We're good to go, right? Well, it's a little more complex than that. For a start, it's not symmetrical, right? Our faces are not symmetrical. So it's the distance from the midline of, actually technically the midline of the head mount display, and some people tend to wear them crooked because we have crooked faces. But somewhere in the middle, to each eye, and those two numbers can be different. Also, more importantly, is the distance back towards the eyes, from the lens back to the eyes. That's important as well. So it's this 2D vector. We do vertical as well. We ask people to position it vertically so it's not misaligned, though people inevitably do misalign vertically. But ideally, it's a sideways movement and a backwards movement, and that tells you where the eye actually is. And this is what we call the center to eye vector. And the center eye is this hypothetical thing that we talk about, the middle eye. And this is all from the user profile. You really don't need to worry about where you got this. Just be aware they're not symmetrical, and it's 2 values per eye. So we talk about the center eye pupil, which is the position that the SDK says. When you say where is the user, this is the value you get back, and it's basically the average of the 2 eyes. So it's at an average eye relief back from the device, and it's in the middle. It's actually in the middle of the device. It's not midway between the 2 eyes. And this is useful for a number of things. It's where players sort of feel they are generally. So you can put the audio listener there, which is a bit odd because it should be further back, but for some reason, I think the audio guys are going to dig into that. For line of sight checks, if you're asking, can the player see something, rather than doing 2 raycasts, you can just use this one. And if you've got a reticle on the world for selection or shooting a gun or something, start from here. The actual center of the coordinate system you can reset. So every time the user sits down, they'll typically sit in a slightly different position, or they'll move their chair slightly or something. So it's good to let them have this ability to sit down, hit reset, after they've had a coffee break or whatever, and that's now 0. It also defines 0 yaw, right? What's straight ahead. Some games don't need that, but some do. And 0 pitch and roll, fortunately, we have a gravity vector. We just, you don't have to determine that, we determine that. But it's good to have this reset mechanism. So the SDK reports the position and orientation of the center eye relative to this 0 position. And then you add on these center to eye vectors, and that tells you where your cameras are. And then you use these virtual cameras in rendering. And please remember, all these are real distances. Okay, they're physical distances in the real world. Don't play with them. Changing them requires surgery. So look at what the user profile says and believe it. Now, if you want to translate it into a different unit set in your world, that's fine, but I'll get into that. So yes, there is one thing you can do with all these numbers, and that is you can scale them uniformly. So you can scale all of them. And you can think of this as a units change. So we supply them in meters, I believe. If for some reason you've defined your world in inches, like Team Fortress 2. I blame, it actually is John Carmack's fault in this case. Traced all the way back through Quake and Doom is why we ended up with inches. But so you can scale them all identically. And when I mean identically, I mean all of them, okay? Don't do this. You have scaled here, you've scaled his IPD down, you have shrunk his head, but you have not scaled the motion of his neck. So he is now a giraffe. This is bad. He will be very ill. Okay, so we do an identical scaling to all 3. And this has the same effect as scaling the entire world up and down. It's a much more convenient way, obviously, right? Rather than adding a scale to your entire world. The nice thing about this is that reducing the scale of the world, note, if I increase the scale of these vectors, I seem to reduce the scale of the world. So in fact, in this example, I've shown him shrinking, so he's actually made the world bigger. But if you shrink the world down, The nice thing is that all these effects that we worry about, this motion acceleration, this things coming towards you fast, all this immersion and scariness and stuff, well, it's all smaller. And so it's all a bit more gentle. And this is a nice trick to helping players who are a little bit less used to crazy VR immersion and just making it a gentler time. It does look kind of goofy because the world's a bit small, but that's much better than a realistic thing that they really can't play for more than 10 minutes. One neat trick we've seen some people do is for like an RTS type thing, where as you lean in to the world, it actually grows really quickly. It grows quicker than you would just leaning in. It's a really neat trick. It does cause some people some problems. So ease up on that. Experiment with it, but just be aware some people find this really very strange. Monocular mode has come up occasionally. It's an IPD of 0, so you put both the cameras at the same place. Some people like it because, hey, now I only have to render one scene. That's okay, that's good. Unfortunately, it seems to be not good. There are some earlier research papers that said, hey, this seems to be better. You don't have the depth of scale, you don't have the depth perception, obviously, but for some people who were sensitive, it seemed to make them not sensitive. Now, in our results, we found the opposite. It didn't work. It either didn't work for some people, it just removed the depth cues, and oh, great, that's not quite as immersive, or certainly in my case, I found monocular mode terrible because my neck motion's happening, but everything feels like it's an infinity, and that's a really weird mismatch. So we were trying to figure out why this old research recommended this. And the only thing we could come up with was they were done with bad VR. Like, the technology just was not good. 300 milliseconds latency, terrible resolution, jitter all over the place. And maybe monocular VR just made it less bad. I think aiming for less bad is not good. I think we can do better than that. So I think now we're aiming for actually good. Monocular just doesn't seem to work. So it's a good lesson in reading old research and just taking those results. Bear in mind, very different hardware. Also, half of it's on Air Force people. So if you happen to be a 20 to 30-year-old white male, very fit, who passed a huge battery of eye exam tests, then this research is for you. If you're 90% of the population, yeah, this is not representative. So how tall is the player? Notice, so I just talked about world scale, but there's a sort of thing of like, no, how tall are they? In the user profile, we ask the player how tall they are, and hopefully they didn't lie, but it doesn't really matter if they did. So you get told this chap's slightly over average. I just picked. His eyes are 6 foot off the ground, so he's about 6'5". And the SDK says, okay, your player, your real world player, is really this tall off the ground. Now, if they're playing themselves in VR, for example, they're wandering around a museum, or they're meeting other real-world people, or they're just exploring a space, right? Then absolutely use this, right? We go through most of our lives being the same height, and it's a nice yardstick. So if I walk up to an Egyptian mummy in the British Museum, or the virtual British Museum, and I stand next to it and I go, oh, okay, he comes up to about there, all right. So, I know how tall that is, okay, yeah. That's great, because my avatar is the same. But what if you're playing a character in a game? What if I'm playing Gordon Freeman, or I'm playing James Bond? But what if I'm a 12-year-old girl? Is James Bond going to be wandering around like this? It's a bit weird. So what you can do is you say, okay, here's NG. NG's about the same height as our player, but he's now playing Heavy. Heavy's much taller. Heavy is a big lad. Everything in TF2 is gigantic. I don't know if you've ever seen the props with the telephone. If they picked the telephone up, it'd be this big. It's huge. So heavy's a big lad. And so all you need to do, you don't scale the world, you just move the eyes up. You just add this to the height of to where the eyes are. So don't change their virtual IPD, don't change the world scale. They want that scale. They want to feel like I think he's 7'6", Russian killing machine. And getting that sense of, I am a gigantic person. You keep the IPD realistic, but you just move the height up. And then they feel like, wow, I am huge. And this seems to be a free aesthetic decision. We've not found anyone who gets disoriented by you changing their height. They just think it's cool, okay? Or not. But it's not like, oh, this is disorienting, right? So yeah, if they're playing themselves, by all means use their real height. It's a real yardstick. It's great for thinking, oh, this table isn't the correct height, and this is the good, I'm in a real world. But if you're in an unreal world and you really are playing a 7'6" Russian killing machine, go unreal, right? Make them huge. It's absolutely fine. You also often need this for gameplay reasons. For example, if you are playing Gordon Freeman, all those levels are designed for Gordon Freeman's height. So when you go into a room, there will be a window, and the designer deliberately placed something in that window that you should be able to see as you go through that room. If you use the player's real height, they'll either be too tall and have to, oh, I see it, or they'll have to jump, right? It's just silly. It kind of ruins all the aesthetic decisions that they've made. But there's this weird thing that happens. I've drawn this diagram here standing. As you know, we here at Oculus discourage standing. It's dangerous. You will hurt yourself. We have hurt ourselves. It's very painful. It also damages the equipment, because the thing you usually fall on is the valuable HMD. Please sit down. So here's the problem. I'm playing heavy, I'm 6'3", this is fantastic. But I'm not standing up. I'm sitting down. My eyes are not, whatever it was, 6 foot off the ground. They're 4 foot off the ground because I'm sitting down. And my feet are on the floor. Now, the brain trusts where my feet are. It can feel, right? It knows where my limbs are, all this sort of stuff. And it trusts that way better than this dodgy vision system, right? And that's why you can walk around with your eyes closed. Because it trusts this very, we're bipedal creatures. We have evolved this incredible locomotion just that happens automatically. We have a very strong sense of where the floor is. So the fact that the eyes are saying, oh no, the floor is 7'3" down, the brain goes, rubbish. No, it isn't. So it just shrinks the entire world. And now heavy's not so big anymore. He's an Oompa Loompa. It's maybe not quite so impressive. It just shrinks the world. It's a really weird effect. And in fact, I first ran across this because I was trying to figure out why my world felt the wrong scale. Everything felt a bit small. And I was going through the math and figuring out, and like, oh, it's about a 2/3 ratio that it feels. So, where have I left a 2/3 in there? Like, what's going on? Did I screw up my inches and inches? Maybe, it was like all this sort of stuff. And I'd just do this on and off, and I couldn't find anything. And then someone emailed me and said, oh, hey, I see you fixed the scale issue. Fix anything. Did someone else fix something? Take it out, put it on. Nope, it's the same. Dude, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, no, oh, wait. No, it's back. What do you mean? Oh, I was standing up. Hang on. Oh, my God, shit. So sure, I'm sitting at my desk. I put the thing on, and I go, and then I stand up, and everything looks right. I sit down. Everyone's short. Oh, shit. Stupid brains again, right? The brains are saying, look, I know where the floor is. I can feel it. I see where the floor is. Therefore, I know, I guess everything must be just changing scale. It's incredibly strong, even though you know it's happening. Can't get away from it. So, And the effect comes and goes depending on focus, right? If I'm looking at an object here and not really paying attention to the fact that there's a world out there, then the object looks real scale. If I move the object away and put it on a table, the object shrinks in size. Because I'm looking at the broader scene, there's the floor. Brains are annoying. What's the solution to this? I got bad news. I don't have one. We here at Oculus do not condone standing up. You can see the lawyer's hand up. One obvious solution, use seated avatars, right? Flying and driving games, or Papers, Please VR edition. Like, actually, that's quite a depressing game. I don't play that. You could try and fight it. You can scale the world up to compensate. This works very badly. Now it just looks terrible. You've got half your brain saying the world is huge and half the brain saying, no, it's tiny, and it's just really confusing. So this doesn't kind of work. It might work for some things, I'm not sure. It's an option to try. Give in, just scale the world down. Say, hey, I can't persuade you that people aren't 4 foot tall, so I tell you what, I'll agree with you. So now at least all the cues match. And this is what I was talking about with the sort of gentle mode, right? Where you just deliberately scale the world down and make everything happy. So at least now they're happy even if the world looks kind of weird. But it is more relaxing. There's worse things to do. Or we had this idea, well, bar stools. Bar stools are high and designed to get your eye height. Bar stool, I don't know if you realize this, it's so when you're sitting on a bar stool, you can talk to someone who is standing up, right? Because bars are crowded places, so there's usually not enough bar stools to go around. That's why they're high, to get that same eye height. Well, why don't we sit on that? That'd be fantastic. We're sitting down, but we are at the right height. The interesting thing is, so I suggested this sort of jokingly, because I don't think it's a good idea. Some of the DreamWorks guys came up to me later and said, oh yeah, we got exactly this thing. What we did for our rides is we hooked up some sort of stirrups. So when you sit in the, so we have them all sitting down, and then we have these little sort of things that you hook your feet into. So your feet are not touching anything. It's just sort of, and this works perfectly. The scale is perfect. Brains. You can also cross your feet, and you can put your feet up on a stool as well. Anything to get the weight off the flat of the foot. Really weird. Or, I want you guys to try something out. This is stuff that's crazy solutions might do interesting things. Transition animations. There's, VR rule number 0, never take control of the camera. Never. It's always got to be under user control. If you are going to move it, then it should be in response to a user action, right? Never just unexpectedly yank it. It's terrible, worst thing you can do. Here's the problem. There's certain animations in games or in experiences that just need to happen, right? The getting in and out of vehicles. Think about the path your eyes take when you open a car door and sit down in a car and close the car door and put your seatbelt on, right? It's this very convoluted path. If you just played that back at the player, it's game over. It's being hurled. Don't do that. Getting into and out of bed, right? Hey, morning, It's not a great start to the morning. Standing up. If you got knocked over by an explosion and you're standing up, the knockdown's really fast. That's not too bad. Getting up, playing that animation, bleh, terrible. Picking an object off the floor. Look. Oh, don't play that at your player. It's really simple, but but we need these things, right? We need people to get in and out of cars. We need them to pick stuff off the floor. What do? And so one option is you show your avatar doing the action, but you bring the camera out. So you just sort of lift it out the back of your head, show the avatar doing the action, and then just pop them back in. The transition's a little bit weird. Maybe you can fade in and out, something like that. Very much depends on your engine and the circumstance. You can use a dissolve or a fade through black. This is really good for, say, getting in a car, right? The avatar walks up, they press the get in the car button, fade to black, sit them down, unfade. It actually works really well. While you're fading out, remember to maintain head tracking, okay? Don't just take a snapshot and fade it out. A variant of this is using a blink, right? Instead of just fading out to black, you close doors to black. Teleport them, open doors. There's a really weird thing that if you do this fast enough, people stop seeing it. If you match the speed of a human blink, they stop seeing it. And in fact, when we were debugging it and making it faster and faster, it just vanished. I was like, oh, did I screw something up? Hang on, look at it on a monitor. Nope, you can very clearly see it on a monitor. It's doing this. Is the blink speed in the profile? That's a good idea. But on your head, you don't even see it. And the reason is because in the back of your head, there's a little being that every now and again shuts your eyes that fast. You're not aware of it, you just filter it out. So the fact that it's not this guy here, it's the guy in the machine, you don't know the difference. It's amazing. It just gets filtered out. It's just like, oh, I blinked, I guess I blinked. Whatever. Someone blinked. Was it me? Brains. Animated avatars. I love this. As I've said, Team Fortress 2 is way too intense for VR. But one thing it does have is these beautiful avatars with these animations that they do and these interactions with other players. And they're all button presses, right? This is not, oh, I'm in the universe. You're pressing buttons. But when they do it, it's really cool. So an example is the high five animation. You activate this and your avatar does this. And you're there like, wow, that's my arm. Oh, it's really cool. And then another player hopefully comes up and doesn't leave you hanging and stuff. Or if you're injured and you call for a medic, right? They put the hand up to their face like this. They go, medic! And that is really immersive. And you'd think the stereo, because it's only in one eye, right? The hand is not really visible from the other eye. But that adds to it. That it's like, oh, it's and it's Heavy's hand, so it's a gigantic meaty paw, getting in your face. It's really good. And my favorite is the sniper's bird. There's two little birds he can have sitting there. And most of the time you don't see it because it's out of your view. But every now and again you look over there, hey man. Hey. Sadly, he doesn't have an animation where he looks back at you. That would have been so cool. But yeah, you just, a little bird on your shoulder. It really adds to this sense of immersion. And again, there's no, the input scheme's ridiculous, right? You're pressing buttons on a controller, but it really adds to this immersion. But how do you do them, right? We have these two rules. Rule number 0, virtual camera should always move with the player's real head. But to get immersion in these avatars, the virtual camera and the avatar's head need to coincide. Otherwise, oh, I'm not inside this avatar. Well, how do we solve these? Because these guys are doing very complex animations. You've seen the soldier's reload animation. He's got a big rocket launcher on his shoulder, and he basically does this. Right? So it's this big motion just for the reload, right? It happens all the time. How do you solve this? You can't just play that at the user. Meat hooks. Look at this little guy. He's really cute, isn't he? Look at him dancing. Nothing bad is going to happen to him. Probably. So we want to play this animation on the avatar because we want to do some dancing. Look at that head motion. That's violent. That's going to make you puke. OK, what do? We play the animation on the avatar like we normally would. So we take this frame of the game. It's this animation. We find the animated head position. You might need to add a center eye bone to the skeleton. There's various ways of doing this. But you find this middle eye position in the animation. Then you decapitate him. The reason is if you put the cameras inside the head, generally what you see is some teeth, and also if they're wearing glasses, you see some glasses, which is kind of weird, and also hats and all that sort of stuff, and it's very distracting. So we chop the heads off. The way we do this is above a certain known bone in the neck structure, we just shrink all that to 0. So if you look at it from the debug camera, it's gruesome. It's just got a sort of pink stump. But you can't see this when you're inside, so that's fine. Then we find the actual player's head, right, from the SDK. So the SDK says, oh, you know, it's up and to the left. Maybe I won't use that terminology. And then you just move one to the other. That's it. And you retain the existing orientation because we want the avatars to be able to spin and things like that. But the position gets nailed to the actual users, what they're doing. And so you get this, right? And I think you can see why it's called meat hook, because the little guy is just thrashing around on this hook, and it looks absolutely disgusting from the debug cam. But when you're inside, it looks really cool. And of course, your feet are sliding all over the place. And the nice thing is, you're inside, right? It's actually quite hard to see that your feet are slipping around when you're doing all these actions, and no one cares. It is important, if you're rendering reflections or the shadow, remember to turn it off, right? No one wants to see their shadow headless and squirming around. It's just upsetting. So this works really well, and it gives you a really nice sense of immersion. So some technical stuff, frame rate and time warp. We've all gone on about this, and I'm sure we'll lecture you. I know they're lecturing them about it next door. You need a rock-solid high frame rate. You absolutely need it. It is the most important thing. Ditch everything else if you need to. Ditch detail, ditch distance, ditch everything, but you must keep that high frame rate. DK2 75 hertz, Crescent Bay 90 hertz. It's getting even harder, especially as, and we're increasing the resolution. The GPU manufacturers love us. You folks, maybe not so much. So this is clearly challenging, and we know it's a tall order. And the two main costs are draw calls and fill rate, and so I'll just go over each one. So you've got twice as many eyes, so there's twice as many draw calls. It's just kind of the way it works out. You can do a little bit of culling, stuff one eye can see that the other can't, simply because my right eye can't look left very far because my nose gets in the way. But unfortunately, that doesn't help all that much. Some things only need doing once. You only need to render your shadow buffers once. You only need to render sort of more distant reflections once. You can get away with that. Close-in reflections, you ain't got to do it twice. And some of the deferred lighting techniques, obviously, you only do once. And some of the new APIs make submitting the same draw call twice quite easy, and we'll see how that shakes out. I think that'll help reduce the CPU cost. Obviously, it doesn't reduce the GPU cost. One thing that does help is this technique that works for some engines and is terrible in others, where you, for each object, as you're going through all the objects that you render, you actually render each twice, once the left eye, once the right eye. So it's not that the conventional way we think of it is we render the entire scene to the left eye and then the entire scene to the right eye. If this works well for your engine, you can just have it for each object, I render it left, render it right. So you just change the viewport and the view matrix, and then you render the object twice. The nice thing is you haven't changed any shaders or any of the other state, so there's a very low cost switch between those two. So you're not doubling the CPU work, and you should save some of the GPU work as well. The problem is, especially if you're on mobile and you're using a tiler rendering, they hate this. They hate changing viewport. They need it for binning purposes. We think there may be a way around this, but right now it's just horrible for them, so don't do that on this. There's also another thing that if you put both eyes on the same texture, you can reduce some of the parallelism that you get. If you're still rendering the right eye, you can't do anything with the left eye until it's finished, but that's kind of a minor thing. So this might work for your engine, or it might be terrible. It's an easy thing to try. Fill rate is sort of harder and also easier. Fill rate, I mean, we're rendering these large frame buffers, we're rendering them at a high rate. It's just hard. Fortunately, we do have a nice control. Naively, we think about the frame buffer of the device, like DK2 is 1920 by 1080. So don't change that. Don't change what's actually going out on the wire. Don't change the actual final frame buffer. What you can do is you can change the size of the render target that you render to before we do distortion. That's actually the main cost. People have got this idea that distortion is this expensive thing. On desktop, it's really not. With full time warp and all the bells and whistles turned on most medium cards, the distortion only takes less than, it takes about 1/4 of a millisecond a frame. It's really cheap, don't worry about it. It's technically difficult to get that distortion right, but it's not particularly costly in terms of performance. So what you can do is you can do this scaling of the eye buffers, which is where your main fill rate's going, and scale them down. And I think John said he fixes those at a K by a K on mobile, and I think that's a very, very good idea. On desktop, currently, we just say, hey, you choose. It's your choice. And it really is. You should treat this like the resolution slider, right? Just because the user has a 4K monitor doesn't mean you don't run your game at 1280 or whatever. You let them choose according to how fast their machine is. Exactly the same thing. Instead of a true resolution slider, in VR you'll be changing the size of the eye buffers, not the actual final frame buffer. And this is massively powerful. And it's also really hard to notice. The Oculus World demo has a little thing in one of the menus that does dynamic scaling, and it does it every frame. So over the course of 2 seconds, it's scaling that up and down by a factor of 2 linearly. So it's down to 1/4 of the number of pixels. You can barely see this happening. It's kind of nice. Unless you've got some text up, and then it's really obvious. But if you're just running around the world, it's like, things are maybe fuzzy. Oh no, they went away. Oh no, slightly fuzzy again, went away. If you bring up the debug grid, it's like zooming like crazy. So it's a really powerful control. And yeah, if you know there's lots of particles or explosions or something in this particular frame and frame rate's going to be hurt, just shrink the render target. That's fine. We support this in the SDK. So time warp. Lots of things have been said about time warp. We keep meaning to do a really in-depth talk about this, and we haven't, so I just sort of bolted this slide on the end just to say a few things about time warp. So time warp does 3 separate things. It does them all with basically the same mechanism, but it's good to think of these 3 separate things. The first is it corrects for rolling shutter. The second is it allows us to do a late, high-quality reprediction after you've rendered the frame. And the third is it magically fixes up low frame rates. So the first one is always on. You don't really need to worry about it. It works. The SDK will take care of this rolling shutter stuff for you. The second one is also mostly automatic. When you say, give me the predicted orientation of the head, we'll give you our best prediction then. You render something for 10 milliseconds, and then you hand it back to us, and we will reread the prediction. This will now be a prediction to the same point in time, which is now closer. So the prediction is better. And so we then, time warp just adjusts it to fix up that higher quality one. The third one, no, it's not true. Really not true. Not true at all. Please purge it from your brains. It's a lie. I wish it was true. That would be fantastic, but it isn't. Let's try this again. It prevents illness from dropped frames. When you screw up, when the PC screws up, and all these little glitches, it's not a perfect machine, it's not a console. Normally in VR, if you drop a frame, it really is like getting slapped in the face. It's painful. You take revenge on the machine, you take it off your head, you hurl it against a wall, and then 5 minutes later you're going, I've broken it. So we like to preserve the machinery. So the dropped frames, they'll still look like dropped frames, but they'll look like dropped frames like they do on a monitor, right? They're not terrible. They're just bad. And it's the same if you miss frame rate, right? If you were aiming for 75, but your user's been a bit optimistic with their resolution setting, and you only hit 65, it's not the end of the world. It just looks kind of crappy, but it's not going to make them sick. So that's what time warp is about. John talked about this ideal world where we get to, say, 120, and we're now rendering at 60. That might work. We don't know yet. We'd love that to be the case, because asking you guys to render at 120 is just nuts, right? 90 is going to be hard. We might find that some content can be rendered at 45 and displayed at 90. It would be nice if that's true. 45 is really marginal. I grew up in the UK where we have 50 hertz TV. So I'm like, oh, is that 5 hertz? Is that really significant? It seems like people can still see that, and that does make a difference. Also, 50 hertz TV is kind of cruddy anyway. But it would be lovely if we could do the 60, 120. But we're not there yet. So don't count on it, because it might be terrible. So these are the lessons learned. Be kind to your players. They have not worn a headset for 8 hours a day for the last couple of months. VOR gain, please don't screw with it. Again, anyone who has had a new set of glasses, this is what you're subjecting them to. It's not nice. IPD and head motion, again, rule number 0. Be physically correct to your players. Changing the world scale is a great way to tone things down for people who are looking to actually play your game rather than have the VR rush. And changing the height of the player is totally, it's just a decision. It's an artistic decision that you can play with. So that's cool. I'm very glad that that's not something that makes people ill. Transition animations, well, try the blink trick. I think it's a neat gimmick that actually does work, and people get used to it very quickly. Meet-hook avatars are awesome. Do this now. Try it out. If you have an avatar, they're very cool. And then yes, frame rate. Sorry, it's hard. We know. A lot of this stuff is talked about in the best practices guide. I highly recommend you seek it out and you read it at least once, because you will see things in there that make you go, really? That's a problem? So this, I'm off to write, Angry Birds. But it's good to get it in your brain just so you know halfway through, like, oh, this content might be a problem. We should do some Kleenex testing on it. Might not be a problem in your context, but just know it is. That's my talk. So I think we've got 5 minutes for questions. I believe there's a chap with a mic. So if you just raise your hands, if I can see them. They will be. The slides will be online.
For adjusting players' heights in the game, you said that didn't cause disorientation, but for immersion, how quickly do players get used to playing a character of a different height from themselves once the novelty has worn off?
Most of the time, people don't even notice. They're used to this, especially if they're stepping into a fictional world. They just take it as read, right? Does anyone notice how tall Gordon Freeman is, for example? I happen to know he's actually shorter than average, which is a bit surprising for an action hero. You think of him as taller than average. But they did that so that the framing of people was good. Rather than having half the frame filled with sky, they just shift it down a bit. Now you see the top of their heads and you see their hands. Otherwise, it just shifts up and you don't see their hands, and then the animators get annoyed because their wonderful work is lost. So I don't know if people even realize how tall the people they're playing is, so they don't seem to notice. Certainly, before we had player heights in the profile, people just made up whatever and no one noticed. It's only when you are exploring a real world that you want to actually you want to know how big these things are, and you want that sense of scale, that it's really useful to have the actual player's height in there. So, any others?
Yep.
Oh, hey.
Yep. Hey, so how do you deal, like the media avatars is a great idea. How do you deal with people in the DK2 changing their height during an avatar interaction? So for example, if they are sitting and they stand up, or if they're standing and they sit down, have you solved that problem as well?
The first thing is don't stand up.
Maybe the doorbell rang, I don't know.
No, then you get things like, hey, when you do this high five, if the real player is leaning to the right, the whole thing will be shifted over to the right, and so it won't match up. Yeah, you have to add fancy IK or something, right? It's just a hard problem. But it's way better to do that than to force the player not to lean. Like that's, yeah, so
right.
Yeah, it's a hard problem. I mean, there's gameplay cheats, right? If my game doesn't have leaning and I lean to the side, what do you do in this game, right? My player avatar is not coming outside and getting exposed, but me in VR, I'm allowed to cheat. What I did in TF2, and I think also Half-Life 2, is there's actually just a sphere that's as wide as your shoulders, so it's about a 1 foot sphere. So if you do lean too far, it just clamps, and that's actually quite unpleasant. But you have to be really trying to lean, and then we go, no you don't.
And so players are fine with that?
I have not seen anyone even notice it exists.
Okay.
So I guess so. And it's sort of obvious why, right? Especially in multiplayer games. Or you could just animate the actual thing, right? If your engine can deal with leaning characters and is fine with, oh, bam, there you go. Oh, sure, lean all you want.
All right, thank you.
Hello.
So it sounds like you spend a lot of your time discovering things that are surprising to cause discomfort to players. Like that you're like, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. But what are some of the most interesting things you've come across that people are surprisingly tolerant of that you wouldn't have expected?
I'm sure I could think of some examples. The height thing was nice, that we don't really care how tall we are. It's an aesthetic choice, not a physiological nightmare like everything else in VR. I don't know.
Anything in motion in particular? Because I notice people have a wide range of, whether it's forward and back or side to side or turning motions. It's kind of a mixed match of what really bothers people. Like, is there anything that surprisingly doesn't bother people that's consistent?
One thing that surprised us was motion. We thought, well, we'll just damp it down more, and that should be better. And it was way worse. If you slowly, I push the thumbstick forwards, and if you ramp up the speed, that's terrible. If you just snap straight from standing to the constant speed, that's much less jarring, which is really counterintuitive until we figured out it's not motion that's jarring to us, because our vestibular system can't detect motion, it detects acceleration. So it's a mismatch in acceleration that is bad. So if you're gonna have a mismatch in acceleration, and fundamentally you have to get it done, get it out of the way and done. So this going from 0 to 10 miles an hour immediately, the acceleration is over 1 frame and then it's done. If you ramp up slowly, the mismatch is over a second, and that's not good. So that was a bit of a surprise to us that just no ramp up, no ramp down. That was backwards from what we thought.
Just related to that, something else really quick. Is Oculus doing any research into a way to detect discomfort, like without the user saying, I'm uncomfortable? Like if they could wear some little monitor thing and the actual system software can know, I'm doing something terrible to the player, immediately stop doing that.
Lots of psychologists would love to have that system, people who do serious science, because it's a huge problem, right? It's a huge problem in not just things like seasickness research, but nausea in cancer patients, right? How do you know they're not very well, right? How do you know you've given them too many drugs and you should stop? Unfortunately, all the signs are things like sweating, so you can detect they're sweating, but they might just be having a good time in your game. So all these signs that we have are generally one of arousal, and like that's what we're trying to do. So we haven't found a good way to do that. And in fact, people lie to you. We did some early testing and surveys where we'd sit people down, we'd put them in Team Fortress 2, actually, for a certain amount of time, and then give them a questionnaire afterwards, asking them how they're feeling. And some of them would say, oh, do I have to stop? I'd like to play some more. And they're sweating, and they're sort of belching slightly, and they're showing all these classical signs of about to hurl, because it was early days, and we had, lots of bugs in the thing. And like, this person is just lying to me. I know they need, the bathroom is that way, run. And they're just like, no, I want to play some more. No, you don't. This is my nice rug. So if people can't tell themselves or lie, it's hard.
The last question.
Yeah, really quickly. Shutter glass stereo, for home TV viewing. Have you done anything with rendering 120 hertz but 60 hertz per eye offset by 1/120th of a second? If you have, does that work? I'm just wondering if that's a cheat to get a higher frame rate or if that's just a road to nausea.
Well, it's effectively what we'd like to try, right? If we have a 120 hertz display that mounts on your head, like doing stuff on monitors it can mislead you pretty easily. So it really needs to be a proper head mount display that moves with your head. As John said, once we've got the conference done, we're going to go home and really try that. If you chop the panel in half, you can get the frame rate up, right? Because you're just displaying less information. And so, stick a pair of them like that, one per eye rather than like that, and hey, now we can test this. And I think we'll find out surprising things. Every time we've tried something else in VR, we've found out surprising things, so I'm sure our predictions will be rubbish as usual, but that's... Offset, well, we do, right? The DK2 render, the scan lines go right to left. Mobile, it goes left to right. And at no time are 2 pixels in the eyes lit up at the same time. Right? It scans the right eye, then the left eye. So that doesn't seem to cause a problem. That disparity at those decent frame rates doesn't seem to cause a problem.